Thank you, Dr. Pond. Today we've got a great panel with a lot of experience from inside the Beltway, and as you can see how they're dressed, they're not from around these parts. So you get your Washington attire on, but a tremendous amount of expertise is here today. Chandler Keys, I first met Chandler when he was working for the National Cattlemen's Association way back when, before it became NCBA, and Chandler was kind of the lead lobbyist for the National Cattlemen's Association, which became the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. We worked a lot back in the late 80s, early 90s on trade, the Japanese Beef Citrus Agreement, and a lot of the agreements that we struck back then, the 1993, what then was the GATT agreement. Chandler and I worked a lot on that together when I was at the U.S. Meat Export Federation. And so he's got a wealth of trade experience within the Washington, D.C. market, and predominantly he works a lot on the policy. So he can share some of that insight with us. Bill Westman. Bill's with the National American Meat Institute, which is the combination of the National Meat Association and the American Meat Institute that took place earlier this year. So we have one beef packing organization that we deal with now. Bill's background was at the Foreign Agricultural Service, and prior to Brazil, I think there's probably many countries he dealt with, but he was in Brazil for about 5 years, and then he was also in China for about 2.5 years working with the Foreign Ag Service. And some of you students might think about, as you look at your careers, don't forget USDA and the Foreign Ag Service, and some of those areas will give you a great opportunity. My background, which Kevin touched on, I started with Montford, Colorado in 1977, and like Gary, I started working for Ken Montford. I started working in production, and I worked in production until about 1982, and then I went into the international sales arena. And one of the things that Randy's pointed out, in 1982, which is not that long ago, I moved into international sales. Well, in 1984, I moved to the U.S. Meat Export Federation because what I found in 1982, 83, 84, these international markets were not open to U.S. product. About all we exported was anything that we wanted to clean our freezers out. We dumped it on the international markets. We got rid of our byproducts on the international markets. But we didn't view these markets as being viable markets for our product. So in 1985, markets started to close down. The Japanese market was state traded. We virtually didn't export any product. By about 1988, everybody started seeing that there's value in these international markets. And we had an administration that came in that Chandler's very familiar with that put emphasis on international trade. And so we started to go into these multilateral agreements and start to open these markets one by one. Japan was kind of first. Drop the state trading, drop your quotas, give us market access. Although we had high tariffs, we started to get more market access. So we have only really been an exporter for 40 years. As Randy pointed out, our competition, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, all of these countries have been at it a lot longer than we have, and probably more importantly, they have policies within their country, within their government, within their trade agreements that are more conducive to market access than what we have in the United States. So we're a relatively newcomer when it comes to playing on the global market, and a lot of that is because, as Randy pointed out, we only export 10%, 13% of our product, while all these other countries are exporting 60, 70% of their production. So their policies are geared more towards the international market. Our policies are geared more towards the domestic market. And one of the things we saw happen as we moved into the late 90s, early 2000s is we've stripped all of the international programs out of our USDA. We have the Food Safety Inspection Service, which is basically focused on food safety. They don't want to be involved in the export market. We have the Foreign Ag Service that basically has people stationed in the countries that deals on trade issues. We have the Agricultural Marketing Service that has tried to jump in the middle and bridge these gaps, but haven't been very successful at it. I'm just going to touch on a few things here. As has been discussed, and Bill and Chandler will get into this much more in detail, but since 2003, and a lot of the charts that Randy put up, we gained a lot of momentum from 1988 into the early 2000s. Our exports were growing tremendously. We were getting more access to these markets. We had good policies in place. We had veterinarian agreements literally all around the world. But in 2003, the market closed because BSE hit, and of course, we were the first country to shut off all imports to the United States from Europe because of BSE. So we kind of set the stage that we were not going to base trade on science. We were going to close markets for BSE, and when we had that first cow in the United States, every country around the world acted just like the United States and shut all of our exports down at that point in time. We really have been building those markets back since 2003, and we've just started to get those markets back. You know, even as recent as last year, we're starting to get back to where we were in 2003. So I won't go through all of these, but we have no access to China. 1.3 billion consumers. Paul pointed out a rising middle class. They say, well, it's only 10% of the population. Well, 130 million people, that's another Japan that's out there for us to be able to service that market. The other thing that's happening in China, they want high quality beef. They want high quality proteins. So we have a tremendous amount of potential in dealing with China. Can you go to the next slide, Bill? Japan, and Bill will probably talk more about this, but we've had a good relationship with Japan. Japan is a high quality beef market. Their Wagyu product is probably the highest quality in the world. So Japan is tailor-made for the U.S. and grain-fed because marbled beef and high quality beef is what the Japan consumer is really demanding. We also have cuts like short plates, beef bowl, which they buy a lot out of the United States, which adds a lot of value to our product. So we've now got a TPP agreement with Japan, and I'm sure Bill will talk about it, but we are at a great disadvantage because Australia went in, struck a free trade agreement with Japan. Their tariff is 9% less. And if you saw Randy's slides where you got an exchange rate that's unfavorable to the U.S. and you've got an Australian advantage of 9% into that market, you can see what's happening to our prices in the U.S. It's just a massive price compression. They're taking the exchange rate, the tariff, and everything out of our price. Short plates with China, closing with the Japan market, have gone from anywhere from $2.90 a pound down to $1.30. And that's all of the factors that Randy's kind of pointed out. If you look at the Russian market, you know, several years ago, when the wall came down in the late 80s, early 90s, we started developing a tremendous market in Russia. It first was kind of led by the leg quarter market, and a lot of cheap poultry went into that market, but we started gaining meaningful access to the Russian market. On the beef side of the equation, we started developing a market for beef livers. So we had two very strong markets for beef livers, which added $6 or $7 a head to our value by being able to export to Russia and being able to export to Egypt. So what's happened since that time, and of course a lot of this is politics way out of our control, but Russia has basically closed down their market to all U.S. proteins. So what's happened is we only have one market left in the world for beef livers, and that's Egypt. And we're seeing a big compression in Egypt right now, so that's taking value out of our cattle. Last one, Bill, I think, is the European Union, and yes, sir.
Russia is a dark and dangerous place. No one wants to go do business there.
In my opinion, Randy, the politics are so far above our heads, and there's so many other factors that come into that. Plus, they've developed a self-sufficiency in poultry. They continue to talk about it in pork. They're never going to be self-sufficient in beef, but I think they probably have gone to alternative imports from Brazil and other countries to kind of fill that gap. And so I think they've kind of moved away from, at least in the beef sector, away from the U.S. And politics in a global way are going to have to change before I think Russia's ever going to strike agreements to let product back in. So some of those situations you pointed out, could lead to that. But right now, the politics, and really, when you talk about trade and you talk about exports and you talk about proteins, we're kind of at the lower end of the spectrum. We're really not a high priority because we sit on, as you pointed out, we sit on such a big consumption market in the United States. We don't have policies and programs that are geared to get us back into these export markets. I remember we were talking in Japan, we talked to the Australians, and we asked them if they could put pressure on the Japanese to open the beef market. And, the State Department contacts us at the Meat Export Federation and says, you guys need to back off because we need to park our nuclear subs in Australia. And I'm going, we're talking about beef here. I mean, nuclear submarines that they said, yeah, it's all intertwined. It's all part of the trade. So back off. Don't put pressure on these guys. And so the politics at that level, and we're so far down here, and plus we don't have an administration that's aggressively going after agriculture and agricultural trade today, which I'm sure Chandler will shed a lot of light on. But, we're trying to fight through these issues, and we're still telling countries we won't do things. We are not going to do things. And our counterparts, our competition is going, yeah, you want traceability? Absolutely, no problem. You want no growth promotants? No problem. Throw the science out the window, throw everything out the window, but we go over and we negotiate, we lead with our chin, say, we're not going to do this, and they go, every other country's done it, so I guess you can go home and sit on your market and you don't get any access. So I think you're going to see a big shift in how we start dealing as an industry on trade. And that's where we have to go. We have to say our government's not going to fight our battles for us. We're probably going to be better to start dealing with these countries directly and saying, if you require that, we as an industry can deliver it. So I think that's where we kind of see things going here in the future. European Union, Dr. Smith went through last night, and he's a veteran of fighting this battle clear back to 1988 when they shut down the market. We've won 2 WTO challenges against the European Union. We have never got access to that market other than a 48,000-ton quota, and frankly, the industry was bought off by raising that quota, but we still have to produce non-hormone treated beef, threw the science out the window for 48,000 tons, and so we've got some market access to Europe, but we have never dealt with the problem with the Europeans. And the last thing I'll say, one of the biggest issues that we have in both these tariff and non-tariff barriers is we have no global way to deal with them. We have a codex, alimentarius. Codex sets minimum residue levels. They approve products. They say these products are safe. Countries can choose to adopt those minimum residue levels or not. And the problem with Codex is it's not binding. If they adopt a minimum residue level and they say it's safe and can be exported to that country, these countries can choose not to allow that product in. Currently, the Europeans have a hormone growth promoting ban. Russia has a hormone growth promoting ban, which I might say, if we get through all the other Russian issues, we're going to be faced right back with the hormone, beta agonist, any of the technology that we use in beef production. They will use that to keep our product out. And China has the same problem. If we get over the traceability issue, we're going to have to deal with the growth promoting issue. So it's all these different types of things that we have to deal with in the international marketplace, and we really don't have a policy or a framework set up to deal with those things. Again, there's food safety, there's trade, and in the middle, there's nothing. As an exporter, and I did it for 20 years, I had really no place to turn other than working with the Meat Export Federation, working with the Foreign Agricultural Service. But when you really went to Washington to talk about veterinarian agreements and talk about non-tariff barriers and things like that, that whole piece has been kind of stripped out of USDA to where you really don't have any place to turn. So I think last year we talked about what kind of individual markets, you know, what they want, what the demands are, what the potentials are. And I thought this year what we would do is come back, you know, kind of tie in with Randy's comments on the economics, and he's pointed out very well how much we rely on these export markets, how much these export markets add value to us as an industry, and how poor our access and our trade policies are to get us access to these markets. Now, there are some things happening. We've got the TPP agreement. We've got a TTIP agreement out there with Europe that's proposed. So there is some movement, but like in the TTIP agreement with Europe, administration changes, the whole negotiation might break down. We've still got to ratify the TPP agreement, and as I said, we're 9% on tariff disadvantage to Australia. The only good thing that's happening with Australia is Australia is 3 years behind us on their drought, so their cattle numbers are dropping significantly. They've killed through a lot of their cattle, and they're now, with rain, going to go into a rebuild, so their prices have probably gone up 70–80% in Australia, so imported beef is going to get higher, more expensive. Their cattle slaughter is dropping, so that's going to give us a little bit of advantage when we start going out on the out on the international market, because we're going to have more production. So anyway, that's kind of a brief overview, and with that, I'll turn it over to the experts and kind of let them go. I think Bill Westman is going to go first, and then Chandler will kind of bat cleanup.
Thanks, guys. Is this microphone working? Hear me okay? Okay, well, good morning, everyone. For international students and guests, Zhao Shanghao, bon dia, buenos dias. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak with you. I want to congratulate the students. I was here last night to be part of that ceremony. It really is a tribute. The 20 who are here, of the 150 that applied, it really is fantastic. And congratulations to all of you. With the North American Meat Institute, we represent basically beef, pork, lamb, and turkey packers. JBS, Tyson, Cargill, the large companies, of course, but also the smaller companies, Boar's Head, delis, small packers, custom meat cutters, and so forth. We're members of the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we coordinate. But our role in policy is to facilitate opening markets, if we can, and to promote trade in meat and poultry products. Not just exports, but trade. So that's an important distinction. I think I'd like to say that if you can interrupt me at any time that you have a question or you want to clarify something, please do. And I'd prefer to have it more interactive than just me standing up here and talking. I think I'd like to build on the optimism of Randy's talk and also Dr. Smith's talk from last night and how we plan to do this. Does this work? This does work. So I'd like to talk a little bit about where we're headed and what we're doing and some of the challenges we face in some of these markets, the difficulties we have in working with countries that don't always use science as the basis for setting standards and setting the rules of trade. And I will include the United States in that group. The United States is not without sin in this accusation and the way we do business. And we can talk a little bit about that and some of those challenges we face. We prefer to use science as the basis for decision making, but not all countries do that. With the drop in tariffs since the Uruguay round, countries are using more and more non-scientific, unjustified barriers to trade to restrict markets, either to increase their own production or just to protect the market themselves. But there's a couple of things happening, as Gus alluded to, that is occurring, and we call one term for that is the Walmart effect, is that some of these markets are so big and demanding so much that they're starting to dictate the rules of trade. And for a company like JBS, for example, wants to play in this market or wants to participate, as they would sell to Walmart, Walmart wants a certain product, a certain cut, a certain way. By golly, if JBS wants to be there, they're going to do it. China and some of the other markets are no different. They're starting to dictate how they want products done, regardless of the science, regardless of the justification, regardless of the international standard that's out there that we prefer that they use, right? And the other one I like to talk about is we call the Japan model. And in Japan, and I'll use the example of ractopamine hydrochloride, they do not allow the use, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong here, allow the use of some of these growth promotants in these markets. But Japan allows imports with products produced with this technology as long as it's in the Codex MRL that's been established. This is the preferred way we want to do business. If they don't, we have nothing to say about what they do domestically in their domestic agricultural production. But don't restrict trade if there's not a scientific reason to do so. Right, Paul? Help me out here. Okay. I'd like to go on and talk about some specific markets, but first of all, I'd like to, Mr. Gustafson here, I'd like to give him a little kudos because he is not only on the board of directors here at the university, he is our chairman of our International Affairs Committee at the Meat Institute, and he's the chairman of the USMEF Exporter Committee. So for the students, here's an individual that has a tremendous amount of experience, knowledge. Use him. He's sitting right here. Ask him questions. These are very, very valuable resources. That's all I'm going to say. Unsolicited. Well, in the challenges that we face, we can't do it alone. And so we work, and our members want us to work with as many trade associations, meat and poultry groups as we can. So as you can see, the first one represents over 100 companies and associations where I'm co-chair with Gary Martin from the North American Export Grain Association to come together to try to coordinate policy with the government, whether it's USDA, USTR, or the Congress, in terms of our lobbying activities. And you go down the list here. We created a Meat and Poultry Industry Trade Policy Council. We have a beef market access group with USMEF and the cattlemen. We talk every week. Same with pork market access. We have a Food and Agricultural Export Alliance, which brings in dairy, soybeans, and grains. We have NAFTA regulatory cooperation. I'll go into that in more detail, and the others as well. So let's talk a little bit about Randy, what he was talking about. If you look at where the demand is coming from, you look at China and what has happened since, well, let's say the mid-1970s and the demand for meat. And there's many reasons for this, but primarily it's the growth in the middle class that he alluded to. I think most importantly of this is the purchasing power, but also the ability to travel. Chinese people are now can afford to travel. They travel to the United States, Canada, Europe. They see what we have in our supermarkets. They taste the quality of the beef, the meat that we have. They want that. They want those products. And when I lived in China, the food and beverage managers I met with from all the major hotels and restaurants, they said, as soon as this market opens up, we will buy as much as you have to offer us, because we'll sell it. And this is what's going to happen. So these are just some projections out. Randy's already talked about that. I would like to go into some specifics, and we'll start with China. And the reason is our International Affairs Committee, for several years now, has said This is the most important potential market for us. We want you to work on that. So, in going through some of the specific issues, you should know that a lot of the problems we face are tied to China's ability to export poultry to the United States. They've wanted equivalence for a long time. They were originally granted equivalence back in 2006. It was reaffirmed in 2013, but they have not been able to do it for many reasons, and we can go into that detail. But the point is, without that ability to export, not actually physical exports, the ability to export, they have slowed things down for us in terms of our ability to open the market for beef, to have reasonable import standards on pork, and they've created problems for us on poultry. So it's not simply the fact that we're negotiating with them to try to get in the market, it's also their ability to trade with us. I would argue that China does not necessarily want to export breast meat to the United States, but they want the ability to export breast meat to the United States. They want that USDA seal of approval. They'll use that to market their products in other countries in Asia around the world.
We're going to get that done, Phil?
Yes.
Talk to Delorier.
What's that?
To Delorier.
Deloro. Now, what's happened is China is able to process chicken from U.S.-approved sources at this time. That means they could import frozen broilers from the United States, Chile, Mexico, Canada, France, or Israel, process it, and send it back. But that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in being able to slaughter Chinese chicken and have the ability to export it. But it's going to take some time still. So we've been working on it for 10 years.
Well, you might mention the food safety inspection plan approval process and all the stuff that went through.
Well, it's very difficult for countries to be eligible to export poultry to the United States. Only 5 or 6 countries are eligible. It's a big hurdle to jump over. First, the country has to get cleared from an animal health perspective by APHIS, and then once that's done, FSIS comes in to approve the plants and the processing side of it. It just takes a long time. It's a long approval process. You have several inspections. You have reports back and forth. Deficiencies have to be corrected. Has to go into the Federal Register for approval, and then the, shall we say, political process can slow that down as well. Certainly, this has been the case with China. I'll relate a personal story. I lived in China. Well, first of all, there's a lot of misperceptions about China and Chinese food, which in China is just food. It's not Chinese food. So we ate the food in China, okay? My wife is a cancer survivor, so we were very careful, just as we are here at home, about what we buy in the supermarket. You look at it, it's got a date on it. You prepare it well, so forth. We did this in China. We ate the chicken and the fish and the beef every week, every day, whatever. I'm still here, okay? We survived. I may look a little older than I did, but we survived, and that's the point. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about the market, a lot of misinformation about China, what's going on. You know, in talking to Chinese friends and contacts, I mean, they're not unlike us. They want safe food. They want a stable food supply. They want a good future for their children. And I think there's a lot of misperceptions about what's going on. And we're working with them, and I got some information about that. So we'll go on from there. So because of the problems we've had, basically between the governments, you know, we can't do anything about the South China Sea. We can't do anything about the Dalai Lama. We can't do anything about these overriding issues, political or otherwise. So What we did was we've tried to create a U.S.-China partnership in agriculture that's private sector led, that tries to address some of the technical issues that China faces so that we can build a relationship, we can build a rapport, we can show that we're there to work together. You know, we are two of the most important countries in the world in producing agricultural products. We should be working together. So this is what this is all about. In September 2015, we had our first seminar with the China Meat Association. Went very well. MEF participated along with some of the private companies. And looking to this year, we're going to produce the meat buyer's guide in Chinese, both for Taiwan and mainland China. There is a team from the China Ag University in the United States right now, and they're coming to Greeley next Friday, I think. Their interest is in looking at the feedlot system that we have here, to learn about it. How do we do it? How do we become better? How do we produce safer products? How do we improve our efficiency, our productivity? Why would we do this? It's a good market for us. It's going to be a good market for us from a genetic standpoint, from a livestock perspective, from a grain perspective. We met a company out in Inner Mongolia that's putting in a 100,000 head feedlot. Another company in Jilin province, which is up north where they grow the grains, access to 1 million head of cattle that they're working on. They're moving to these very large feedlot systems as best they can, more from an animal health perspective than from anything else, but also to improve the products they produce. We want to help them do that. And we think it's going to work well. So, China Ag University wants to set up a program where they train students there in Beijing, then come here, maybe come to Colorado State, University of Nebraska, Texas A&M, to learn here as you are doing, so that we can compare information. We can see how we can improve our products. So it's really a very interesting project. And what's interesting is they came to us about it. They asked for help. So this is what we're trying to do. And then, in general, the program is called Farm to Chopsticks. We're looking at where can we fill in those technical issues that they've asked for help with, whether it's HACCP plans in the plant, whether it's animal handling. It's a big issue now, becoming a big issue in China. Cold chain distribution. We know that Chinese government has announced that they want to get rid of the wet market concept. This is huge for us and for anybody else working in China. If you move to a case-ready product, what does that mean in terms of refrigeration, packaging, distribution, and so forth? So tremendous opportunities in China. This is just some of the companies that have signed on to this partnership, and it's growing, so we feel that we've got something good started and we want to build on it. All right, let's move to some other markets. And Chandler, you let me know when I need to stop, okay?
You can just do it all.
No, I don't think so. Anyway. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
You referred to wet market concept. Could you elaborate on that?
Could you repeat the question? You want to know about the wet market concept. That's what you have, and maybe some of the Chinese students can explain it better than I can, but I wish I had some pictures. I didn't bring those with me. But you have basically open-air markets that sell mainly pork, but also chicken and offal and all sorts of products that is laid out on a table, and it's in a non-refrigerated environment. And people buy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but many people buy what they need for that evening. They'll buy it as they come home from work, and you see many people walking home with a little bag, and they'll have vegetables and some meat, and that's what they cook up at night, right?
You kill them in the morning, Pete, and you kill them in the afternoon.
Yeah. So it's become a food safety issue for them. And if you go to some of the shows now, you'll see that companies have vacuum-packed pig's feet, vacuum-packed livers, poultry byproducts that are nice packaging and refrigerated and so forth. You never saw that before. So this is how that market is changing. A lot from consumer demand, but also because of health concerns. And we see as tremendous opportunity for us. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So it sounds like from a private sector standpoint, this is a priority to us, but do you get the sense, I mean, I don't hear much about it in the news or anything, do you get the sense that our U.S. leaders, is it a priority to them? Or what can we do to really push this through to get that to happen?
A priority to who? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So to the private sector, it sounds like we're in the formation of a partnership and it's important to us, but do you get that same sense from our U.S. leaders? Is that something that's important?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We didn't actually need their endorsement, but it really originated from, and Paul, I forget the year, Vilsack was there, Secretary Vilsack, when they made this announcement with the Minister of Agriculture in China that they would work on food security, food safety, and sustainability. So we took those three concepts and says, we can work with this. We can do this. 2011? Yeah, but the original concept of the partnership came out of the fact we weren't getting anywhere. This wasn't working. Whatever the governments were doing was not working. And we were completely frustrated as private sector. This is not how we want to do business. We can do better than this. So that's really where it came from. Yes, sir.
So you just said we can enhance the communication between the Chinese or Chinese university and America.
Yes.
So do you think is there any like a kind of chance that let because we personally like we cannot persuade Chinese government to open the market. But do you think is there like a kind of chance that we can communicate with Chinese universities and let them persuade Chinese government to open the market?
Yes. I should have mentioned that when China Ag University Beijing came to us about this, we immediately contacted the Ministry of Agriculture. And we have very good contacts there, as well as the China Meat Association, which is a private sector trade association, but it's headed by a government official, okay? So we immediately contacted them to let them know what we were doing, and we got their endorsement. That part was very important. What you're alluding to is absolutely correct. We had to get the Ministry of Agriculture's approval, if you will. Maybe not in a document, but sitting with them, having some tea, talking about it, and saying, they said, yes, this is a priority for us too. Go ahead, please do this. So, good question, good comment. Yes, sir.
Yes, both you and Gus have referred to a lot of our international government support at USDA as having kind of withered. Is that a budgetary problem? Is that an emphasis problem? How's that come about?
Wow. Can be a sensitive answer. Go ahead.
I mean, we can wait, or we can do it now. You know, is this on?
Switch at the bottom.
Yes. Well, to my mind's eye, we talk a lot about trade. And people like USMEF and the Meat Institute, they do a lot of things behind the scenes. But I don't think as an industry yet have we put the resources that we need to in this industry to really put pressure on our government to reformulate how our government operates so we act more and more like an export country. We have to look more and more like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Brazil, in how we operate. Our structure of our government is not set up correctly to negotiate after deals are done. So after TPP, after these agreements. It's sort of like, I love these agreements because people travel around the world for years putting these agreements together. I mean, it's a big party. And they're going here, there, everywhere. And it's like, I call it a lot like marriage. You got that courting period, you get all this stuff done, and then you have the marriage, and then you have the reception on the South Lawn, you know, at the White House, cut the ribbon, and the next day, It's marriage, and you got to work at it. And you got to have pieces in place to make it work every day. And to Randy's point, we just spent 20 years on country of origin labeling, fighting it inside our own industry. It took a lot of time and energy and effort, and it sent the wrong message to politicians about what we really cared about. Until we start acting more like Bill and what they're doing in USMEF as an industry and really put that resources behind it, the politics will never, well, the policies will never align, and that's a problem.
And I think also a very important point is that USTR, USDA have worked very hard in the TTIP and the TPP negotiations, and I think are doing the best they can in a difficult environment. For this current administration politically, I think it's difficult in some respects to do a lot of these things. There's a lot of resistance to opening markets. There's a lot of resistance to trade. And I would have to give USTR credit for doing a good job on some of these things, particularly with Japan. It was mentioned before. We face stiff competition from Australia there because of the tariff advantage. And other markets. I mean, it's not just the 12 TPP countries. It's the next 6. You know, 6 countries contacted USTR when the negotiations finished the next day and said, we want in. We want to join. We want part of this deal. So that's why it's important. I'm getting the hook here, so I think I'll just say that we have this available to you if you want to look at it. We've got some other information here, but as we look at Europe, Europe is a real problem. We won the hormone case, and now we have a non-hormone treated cattle program. So back to the Walmart effect. You want to participate in this market? This is what it means. A tasteless advertisement for our trade show in Atlanta, end of January, all about meat processing and poultry and feed. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your attention. Nice. It's great to be here.
I need that, your microphone. All right, I'm batting cleanup here. I'm going to go really quickly. My name is Chandler Keys. I run a lobbying shop in Washington, D.C. For 20 years, I worked for NCBA. For 10 of those 20, for all 20, I was in the Washington office doing lobbying work for the cattlemen. And for 10 of those 20, I ran the Washington office in D.C. On all the issue areas that we worked on. After that, I worked for SWIFT and then JBS, doing government affairs and industry relations. And then I asked if I could go out on my own, and JBS and Wesley Batista were kind enough. Now I represent some other companies. My main client is still JBS, and I do a lot of work on trade with them. I want to start off. Last night, Gary Smith, who I admire, has been a mentor of mine in my career, talked about this problem that we have in America today about people not looking at science. And I wanted to make one thing clear. Our problem on people listening to science and listening to rational behavior is coming from highly educated people, wealthy people, people that should know better. But you got to understand something about wealthy people. Wealthy people want to differentiate themselves from the great unwashed. They don't want to go to Walmart, right? They don't want to hang out with poor people. They want to go to Whole Foods and see their own kind. The problem is they just don't stop at that. Then they call their congressmen, they have cocktail parties, they get to influence the other elites in society. And I think that's what you're seeing in America a little bit, is that a lot of America now doesn't trust the elites. They usually trust them to run things and stuff, but now they're just basically saying, look, I don't trust you. Why? Bernie Sanders is up, right? Trump up. I mean, Trump is playing to this anti-elite crowd, even though he's an elitist. But he knows, how you get to it. So it's sort of the great unwashed being pissed off at the people that should be in charge and running things. It's just to add on to your point. The other thing I think is amazing is that we're sitting here talking about eating more protein globally. Eating more protein. We're eating more protein here. I mean, Americans could probably, I heard about Meatless Monday. And a reporter asked me at one time, he said, what do you think about Meatless Monday, Chandler? I said, look, most Americans could do with a foodless Monday. Right? We eat so much food. But there's a housewife or there's a household in Indonesia or somewhere it's got a meatless Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They want another meat day. All right? So it's just these elitists. And that's the same way with Europe. That's why most of our ancestors got on leaky ships and got the hell out of Europe. And that now we're being more Europeanized, particularly by these elites. But when we're talking about eating all this food, this protein, we had 2 reports that just came out, government reports. One global government, WHO, and one our own government, basically saying eat less meat. Eating too much meat. Meat will kill you. That's from the same elites. And it's just this disconnect that you have to worry about sometimes. I worry about it every day. The trade issue here is we've got these countries in these regions, North America, Southern South America, Australia, New Zealand, that really can grow animal protein quite well. And the other countries that you see up on the board that grow a lot of animal protein, it's, except for pork in China, like this thing in India, they just don't have demand inside. It's a subset of something else. They milk these animals in India and then they kill them. And they ship it somewhere else. The beef production in Europe is a subset of the dairy industry. But if you look at those big beef-producing, animal protein-producing areas in this world, particularly North America and South America, and Randy, this hemisphere, Randy alluded to it, we do meat and animal protein really well in these regions. And we have to have an alliance with these meat-producing, animal protein-producing countries. So we can push meat forward, push animal protein forward, and all the technologies that go along with it. And I call those the countries that accept technologies, the acceptor group. And then you have the non-acceptor group, run by the European Union, of like, whoa, 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 whoa. Don't use GMOs in Africa, because one day you, Africa, might produce enough food to send to us, and we don't want GMOs. I mean, it's neo-colonialism at its best. And we sit there and let them get away with it. We should be punching them in the nose about this type of activity. So, because that's it, the Europeans are running this sort of we got enough, we don't need any more, so the hell with everybody else. And that's the problem that we face here. And what I was told to ask is, we have to be organized better to lead globally about producing food, from GMOs to all the technologies it takes to grow food animals. And we can't get sucked into this vortex, this trap of Europe and the elites that are in this country. If they want to go to farmers markets and they want to spend $20 a pound on artesian goat cheese, I'm good with that. But the great unwashed needs to go and buy Kraft singles, right? Because their disposable income is very important. People forget in America, 20% of Americans have household incomes of $100,000 and more. 80% have below. I talked to the head meat buyer for HEB the other day. He said the disposable income of the average household in South Texas, below San Antonio, for HEB is $15,000 a year. Right? They got to be careful with their money because they want a car, they want a phone. 10% disposable income on food is great for them. 20% is bad for them. These are the things that we forget about. So we need to do a better job of organizing and being leaders in the world on technologies. We also need to handle this better as an industry. And that's where the young people come in. We as industry groups, USMEF, Meat Institute, NCBA, pork producers, whoever they are, we need to be hiring young kids like you, put them on the staffs, and put more resources toward figuring out these export markets and managing the image of animal protein domestically. So it's a big difference. It's a big difference. One, we need to be pushing exports, right? And then we use our resources to manage the image of animal protein in the domestic marketplace. We don't need to grow demand. When I hear NCBA people talking about growing domestic demand from 5 to 6 eating experience of beef, I want to explode. I'm like, look, we were eating too much already. We're going down. We need to get this thing out of here. And what we need to do domestically is protect ourselves from activists that want to come in and artificially lower the amount of beef, animal protein, I put it that on a broad basis. Manage that better. We can beat these guys. There's a hell of a lot more people that eat animal protein and like animal protein than there are that people don't. And we act like it's 50-50 fight. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen. So we really need to work on that. And we need to spend some time managing that as it relates to trade. Larry Pope, the last CEO, he's retiring from CEO of Smithfield after he cut that good deal with the Chinese. I'm sure Larry's got a little bit of change in his pocket now. But he said something famous. He said, live by exports, die by exports. You have to manage it all the time because at any given moment, a foreign country, it's not like shipping a load of beef to Walmart. They call up, they want a load of beef, yep, boop, 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 gets there, no problem, no muss. Somebody calls up in Korea and says they want a load of beef, hold your breath. You put it on the water, it gets over there, you don't know if it's going to go through. You know, all of a sudden, you know, Bill gets a phone call, I get a phone call from Gus or whoever's at JBS saying, oh my God, we got 5 loads of whatever hung up in some port I've never heard of because we can't get an export stamp on it or whatever the hell it is. And then you call the USDA and they're shipping you so far around the globe in their own universe. Well, I don't know, that's not part of my deal. So in the last Farm Bill, we put a provision in to create an Undersecretary for International Trade at USDA. Because right now, the person that's in charge of international trade at USDA, his or her title, is called the Undersecretary for Domestic and Foreign Agriculture. I mean, is that the craziest thing you ever heard? I mean, it's like an oxymoron. Foreign and domestic? Really? Yin and yang? How do you get your head around that? You go from one day worrying about computer software and the farm service agencies around the country so we can get checks to our farmers, and the next day worrying about a stamp getting in a load of chickens in Tianjin. He can't or she can't do it. So we split this up, and the administration says I just got told we're going to ignore it. We're going to ignore it. So Vilsack's going to ignore it. So we're going to set up meetings with whoever the next president of the United States is going to be and make sure they implement that at USDA. So we have one-stop shopping. Because USTR does a great job of the new trade deals. They're unbelievable. They can cut these big trade deals and we get the best thing. It looks so good. And the next day we have to implement it. And it's not bad for 1, 2, 3 years. And then all of a sudden it gets sour like a marriage. And you got to go work it. You got to manage it. And you got to have somebody that's in charge of that. Because USTR doesn't want to worry about putting a stamp on a box. They do big stuff. We need to make sure that we got guys. I'll tell you, if New Zealand has a problem with lamb meat anywhere in their world, they got like a trade SWAT team. They get on one of their jets, they get the prime minister, everybody goes and they haul ass wherever that lamb is getting hung up. Because they know if they don't get that lamb out of that country, that lamb backs up. There's only 4 million of them to eat through it. And that lamb, all of a sudden, you're covered up with lambs, you're drowning in lambs. It's a bad deal. But they put that emphasis on there, and you saw this slide that Randy showed. Uruguay, Paraguay, all these guys, man, they are on top of it. They got a problem? Boom. We got a problem, and we look around and go, who are we going to send? Let's put some ad hoc team together and just sort of get on a plane and go over there and try to fix it, i.e., Japan and BSE. That was a frickin' frack show if you ever saw one. I mean, we're so disorganized. Now I get a phone call from the Secretary's office, Dale Moore, late at night saying, you know, the president's getting ready to call the Prime Minister of Japan on this beef deal. I'd say, okay, you must have a deal. Well, no, quite. We don't have the deal yet, but we think we can get him on board with the president to talk to him. I said, okay, what happens if they say no to the president? What are we going to do, call the Pope? I mean, who do you call after that? But sure enough, the president gets on the phone with Abe or whatever that guy with the long hair was. Prime Minister, guy said, hey, Mr. President, I'd like to help you out here, but the answer is no. It's disorganized. I mean, and Bill comes from that world, and I know he defends it a little bit more than I do, but it's something that we have to be more cognizant of and manage. And I want to say one last thing before we go. Poultry, pork, and milk have a distinct advantage on beef, and here's why. They can grow these entities, poultry, pork, milk, in barns. And they have very little transactional, right? The poultry industry is totally integrated. The pork industry is one transaction away from slaughter, if no transaction. In milk, you know, it's a co-op system for the most part, and your milk truck comes every, you know, no disrespect to any dairy guys, but it comes every 2 weeks. You know, it's a great cash flow. It's all in the barn. You've got control of it. You manage it. You have a pretty integrated system, or you can make new products very quickly. And, you know, look at the dairy, just the revolution in dairy products in the last 10 years. In our industry, you got transaction, you got 4 times, possibly 3 to 4 times before the animal even gets killed. You know, moving them around a lot of exposure, a lot of ownership. I mean, it's a great thing in America is we have 700,000 cow-calf producers. But remember, only 20,000 of that 700,000, correct me if I'm wrong, have 200 mother cows or more. You know, so we have a pretty disorganized industry, and it shows itself within our own trade association and how we operate. So we have a challenge there that the other proteins don't necessarily have. And then I'll end with this. Brazil will become a better beef producer. They are pushing cows off land in Brazil as we speak to put cotton, soybean, corn, whatever the hell they're going to put on it. And the guys that are left growing the cattle on marginal land are getting better and better at genetics. They're going to be better producers in the next 20 years. They're going to be more professional because it used to be in Brazil, cattle and land were a hedge against political and economic instability. So the rich people will buy land, they put some cows on it, and they live in Sao Paulo or Rio. Things got bad, go to the hacienda. Now, boom, they're converting all that ground to production agriculture, and the cows are getting pushed. Same way in Argentina. The cows are pushed off the pampas. They're in marginal land. The young people are basically going into row crop production in Argentina. But Brazil is a little bit different. And I think there'll be a better and better cattle industry, and we need to be closer and closer to Brazil, United States, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, you know, and Australia, New Zealand. I think we should spend some time, and where I started, we need that group, that 5-nation, 6-nation, 7-nation group to be the catalyst of pushing animal protein forward in the world, and we can't do it alone. We're doing a better and better job. We have more and more opportunities. But as Wesley Batista told me one time, he said, you know, Chandler, when Americans get more disposable income, they buy another flat screen TV. When the rest of the world, when the developing world gets more disposable income, they buy animal protein. That's basically all you need to know. Thank you very much.
Do we have any time for any more questions, Dr. Pond, or are we pretty well done? Yeah, we'll take a couple here for a minute. Pete?
You and I have had this discussion a couple of times about source verification for access to China. Can you share that
Well, yeah, we've talked about source verification, traceability. That's our biggest hang-up with China right now, and it's really a hang-up with China on traceability because they put it in their requirement. They went to Brazil, they went to all these 40 countries and said, you got to have traceability. These countries go, no problem, we'll give you traceability. Whether they do or not, that's another question. We go in at the U.S. and we say, we need traceability, can't do it. Well, if you can't do it, then you can't have access to our market. You got to say yes, you can do it. And this was out of the packers' hands. The packers can't say, yes, we'll give you traceability because it's a producer issue. And so we're just coming to grips with the fact that we can do this. We can put a traceability system in place that's going to serve our industry from many different aspects, not only trade, because every other country has a traceability system. Australia is probably the most robust traceability system around the world. Canada's got an animal ID program, but they don't really have a database. Everybody's got some type of traceability system, and the U.S. really doesn't. But we're moving in that direction, and I think it's going to have to be a foregone conclusion for animal health questions in the United States, and it's going to have to be a foregone conclusion if we want to trade with countries around the world. People want to know, whether they look at it or not or audit the system, where did this product come from? How was it produced? Is it produced humanely? Is it safe? And if you don't have some type of source verification or some type of traceability program, you cannot answer those questions. So I believe in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have a system in place, and it is important. And the only other thing I'd close with on that, don't let a catastrophic animal health issue in the United States catch us by surprise and then drive the need for traceability. Kind of like the BSE question. All of a sudden everybody said, we need traceability because we've got to trace all these cohorts, we've got to do the epidemiology, we've got to find these things out. We didn't have a system. So I think it's a foregone conclusion. Move off of traceability, move off of source verification. Let's move on to the other issues, as Chandler pointed out, and get some support to do it. 2 more? 1 more? In the back.
Oh, yeah, I mean, look, I think I got my mic on, right? I got it. The question is, can the university system help us put a better program together, be more coordinated, get the government with the industry lined out? I think absolutely. I think they do, and they have. But it has to, the problem is, in all these types of situations, you got people that want to own something, right? They want to own it. We own that. Get off that deal. That's my deal. It's called silos. We got to break these silos down so people are working with one another. So we're not cross purposes because everybody wants credit. I mean, it is terrible in government. It's terrible in our trade associations. It's terrible in our society, you know. But I think we can get there. I think we understand the necessity. I think the breakthrough on traceability. We can trace these animals. We just need to tell China, yeah, we can get that. We got it. We'll handle it. Anything we ship to you will be traceable. Right now, we can go to any of our major feed yards in this country, which is only 1,000 of them, and let's take a subset of maybe 500 of them. You can get on the phone right now with those feed yard managers and say, how many cattle in that feed yard can you trace back to a farm? And they can give you a percentage right now. Yep, we can find that. We can go to that order by, boom, 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 right back to that farm. They can do it. We can do it. But here's what we do is we send technical people to China to negotiate instead of sending a politician that answers to the president. And that technical person gets over there and they go, well, we can give you traceability, but you know, it would really be good if it was really tight and controlled by us, i.e. APHIS. And then everybody in America, all the cattlemen say, black helicopter. That's government. Can't have the government tagging my cow. you know, and all hell breaks loose and it just breaks down and doesn't go anywhere. So it's just a mess, but we're getting there. It's getting better.
More? One more.
I've got a question relative to outside ownership. We've seen it, Chandler, you talked about Larry Pope, Smithfield, Chinese owner. Your previous employer was JBS, Brazilian company, the largest meat packer in the world. Where are we headed with that? How do you see that playing out over the next 10, 15 years in the U.S. marketplace?
Well, I think as it relates to food, I think the Brazilians are already here. It's not just JBS. I mean, people think InBev, right? InBev is a Belgian company, right? It's the largest beer owner in the world. It's not Belgium. It's Brazilian, right? They're buying, in this 3G thing, you know, 3G that bought Heinz and Kraft and everything, that's Brazilian. That's all Brazilian money. And they come in and cut the fat out of these big, lazy American organizations. I'm telling you, there's a lot of fat in them. And they have a lot of fun cutting all that out and getting all that profit. If you bought InBev right after they bought Budweiser, you'd be a rich person today. Because the first thing that InBev did when they went to St. Louis, Augie Bush and his boys had just put in a whole row of suites in, mahogany paneled suites, private bathrooms, everything, all that good stuff. You can look it up in the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The day they closed, the Brazilians brought wrecking crews in and tore it all out and put cubicles in. So, you know, I think there's some good there. I think the Thais, the Chinese, people that see business opportunities and where they can make more margin, they're going. That's where that money's going to go. And so I think you can expect more of that. And I think you'll expect to see the Brazilians more in Europe, taking some of those tired old companies over and managing that. They're getting back, you know, they're getting backed by Buffett.